Now, Vance is right. Free speech is in retreat across Europe. And almost every week on this program, we bring you new examples of the Orwellian thought control apparatuses being brought to bear on a population that is beset by terrorism and knife crime, but where the real problem for the authorities seems to be thought crime. Here's more of what Vance had to say about this.
And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action.
But that's not the only European problem that Vance called out. The vice president was also brutal about the policies of some countries, particularly Germany, that have allowed themselves to deindustrialize.
Germany is the one country, maybe, in NATO that did not follow the stupid Washington consensus and allow their country to be deindustrialized during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And yet at the very moment that Putin is more and more powerful, where the Russian army is invading European countries en masse, this is the point at which Germany starts to deindustrialize? Look at the number of people working in manufacturing in Germany now versus 10 years ago. Look at the critical raw materials produced in Germany now versus 10 years ago. The energy dependence now versus 10 or 20 years ago. We have got to stop deindustrializing. We want Europe to be successful, but Europe has got to take a bigger role in its own security. You can't do that without industry.
Now, I'd go further and say it is amazing that Germany has inflicted on itself the same rustication that some in the U.S. government wanted to force on them, and thankfully they didn't succeed after World War II. But it was on the subject of mass migration that Vance really opened up.
The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course it's gotten much higher since. And we know the situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade.
Vance noted that just the day before his speech, there was another Islamist car ramming attack in Munich, the very city where he was speaking.
We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction?
Yet, Vance said, European leaders were ignoring what people were urgently crying out for: to be heard and to have their votes and their voices respected, rather than being blamed for having the wrong ideas or for supposedly being influenced by outside voices from beyond their own shores. Have a listen to this, and note at the end there's the name of an old friend of this program here. Have a listen.
I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy. And speaking up and expressing opinions isn't election interference. even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk.
Ah, yes, remember Greta? Yes, it was fine for her to bully leaders around the world and terrify children, including here in Australia, and tell them to go on strike for the climate. But Elon Musk? Oh no! Mean tweets incoming! Look, the whole speech was an absolute tour de force, a banger. But what Vance was saying to the Europeans is this: you are making yourselves unrecognizable culturally, politically, socially, and running against all the values of liberty and enlightenment that once made you European and which gave the world the gift of your civilization. And now you expect to be defended by America even as you run yourself down? The whole speech could be summed up by this one line from Vance, which I think deserves to go down in history as his Ich bin ein Berliner moment.
If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump.
How perfectly put. Europe is running in fear of its own voters. And it was, again, I say this again, an intervention. Yet, as the saying goes, there are none so blind as those who will not see. The Europeans in the audience were horrified to cop this lecture from this upstart colonial. Here's left-wing German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius.
This democracy that was just called into question by the US Vice President, and not just the German democracy, but Europe as a whole. He spoke of the annulment of democracy, and if I understood him correctly, he compares the condition of Europe with the condition that prevails in some authoritarian regimes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not acceptable.
And everyone clapped. Well, they may be cheering him now, but it is Vance who was in the right here. And in a few days' time, Germany will go to the polls, and the right-wing AfD is looking to be in the box seat while authorities try to do everything in their power to smother that party's vote. As ordinary Germans become increasingly fed up with crime, migration, terrorism, and the running down of their once great nation by the left. The big question now is, as Vance suggests, will the people's voice in Germany be allowed to be heard, or will it be silenced? And if it is silenced, well, remind us again what gives them the right to lecture the rest of us about democracy. What is this Europe exactly that we are defending?